If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. Hello everyone, I hope we're all getting settled into the Halloween mood nicely. I've got some really cool videos coming out which are completely different from anything I've done before. I just got all the filming done on that, so make sure you keep your heads up for that. And before we start this video, I want to know, what's the most scary thing that's ever happened to you in the woods, while camping, or anything really? I think mine wasn't too bad, but I went jogging once and managed to get stranded out in one at midnight. Or probably not midnight, probably like 8 or something, but it got dark really quick. But luckily I managed to see a McDonald's and that actually guided me back to safety, funnily enough. But yeah, let me know in the comments below, and I hope you'll enjoy this video. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff that I was able to put on my applications. As most UK students know, one of the best things to have on there is a Duke of Edinburgh award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages, following nothing but a map and compass. No GPS allowed. It's a teamwork experience and you can camp and overcome hurdles together. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time, so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like I would have thought, but hiked maybe 10 miles through the woods in a small village in a pretty Amsel area. By the end of the journey, we're soaked to the bone, miserable, looking forward to heading home. For the last part of the journey, we're on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees either side. We were marching onwards in silence at this point, when all of a sudden, there's a rustling in the foliage to our left. Now from behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked like he's in his late 70s and early 80s, very pale, liver spots dotting his face and a grey-white comb over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like this to go into the woods? The instant thought seeing a guy here is that he's lost a plot. There was something else that took an extra moment for me to notice though. It puzzles me. He's bone dry, not even dirt on his shoes, something that should not be possible. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as froze and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him, asking if he's alright. The man continued to stare for a moment, not even moving a twitch. Then, suddenly, becomes very animated. It was almost as though he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards to the woods, mentioning for us to follow him, of which we did. We started off as a brisk walk, then escalate to running as we struggled to keep up with this old man. After a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so continued to follow the noises until we reach a huge slope, probably a 40-degree angle, spanning perhaps 50 feet or more and slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold on to or anything. I remembered looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope, wondering, how the hell did he cross that so quickly and cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it's hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear to be wet or muddy whatsoever. Me and my uncle looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I stepped towards the edge, trying to make my way down, when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm, pulling me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here. I don't like it." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us to come down, saying his friend needed our help. He's in trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that we're going to head back to our car and call emergency services, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have the tools and everything necessary to help. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come down the slope right now, or there'll be hell to pay. His voice has now changed drastically. He was practically growling his words. His hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes look as though they're on the verge of bursting out of their sockets. His skin gone from pale red to almost an intense colour. We now begin to hurriedly make our way back the way we come. He demands and threatens us as we get closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power march the remaining quarter-mile or so to the car, all the while my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there's a possibly mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We're ordered to get out of the car and await the police so we could show them what we've encountered. About an hour later, we meet 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets, etc. We lead them to the exact spot, and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction that he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all week, but there's no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up on had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man that we encountered. We still have no idea what happened to this day. When I was around 9 years old, I had 2 of my friends over to play and hang out. I lived in a small neighborhood in a small town, but our other neighbourhood was full of either elderly or young couples with new families and kids to play with. The girls I was hanging out with that day lived in my neighbourhood as well, and were the same age as me. My neighbourhood looped into a circle, with part of it connected round the end of the street. My friends and I always walked down there because there was a little trail that went into the woods with the cute rustic wooden bridge over a stream. We had also discovered our way from the woods into a whole new area of a nearby neighbouring neighbourhood, so we liked to walk through to the other side. Recently, they started construction in the woods. There's a couple of new clearings full of dirt piles to make way for new homes in the woods. That day, it's super muddy, raining the night before, and we all wore rubber rain boots. Started down the path, stopping at the bridge. I'd just gotten a new digital camera, so we start taking a selfie together on the bridge, or the old version. We thought this was super fun, because especially at this age, none of us really had our own cameras or phones, although I had a little flip phone in case of emergency that my mum insisted I bring with me on our walk. After our group pictures and blurry pictures of the forest, we kept going down the paths. Eventually, we get to a clearing where they'd just cleared out to prepare for construction. We're climbing the giant piles of dirt and sand, outstretching our arms, pretending that we're looking down at the rest of the world. I snap a few pictures from the woods from my vantage point. We laugh as the dirt beneath one of my friend's feet gave way, and she slid down the dirt hill on her butt. We were just easy going, innocent kids that had fun over the little things that I'm getting at. Eventually, we decided to venture back home, and we were walking down one of the little trails. I've always had good intuition. As we're walking, suddenly I felt my stomach flip-flop, and I froze in my path looking around nervously. I just felt as though we're being watched. My friends heard my footfalls crease and began asking me, "What's the matter? What are you doing?" I shushed them, now gesturing for them to be quiet with my hand. We all freeze, looking around, but none of us saw anything, eventually going back. But one of the girls breaks silence. She says nothing's here and we're fine, but I could not shake the feeling. Uneasily, I follow them, and walking ahead of them protectively, since it seems as though I could always sense trouble. But now, I stop in my tracks. As we rounded a corner, I see two grown men facing us, ahead on the long path we're taking, each one carrying something. I only looked briefly, but it appears as though one of them is carrying either a chainsaw or normal saw, and the other like a hammer or small metal bat. One's wearing a black t-shirt, the other one a long blue t-shirt. I told my friends run. We turn around, sprinting down the path we've just taken, boots splattering, the mud everywhere. I look over my shoulder, still running, still following us. I said quick, to the other neighborhood. We keep going, waving through the trees and bushes and thorns. It was like a cliche movie scene, as one of my friends fell frantically. Scared, I helped her up. We keep on running. Eventually, we could all see the trees thinning as we neared the other area, and we ran though, as our feet now finally hit the pavement. We didn't stop. We keep booking it through the neighborhood, eventually getting far enough away where we can turn and look at the entrance to the woods, and the two men are there staring at us. They hadn't entered the neighborhood, probably because it's public, but we could see them shirts from where we stood. The neighborhood we're in now was about a 10-minute drive from my home on a main road, which is why we like taking the woods since there's no sidewalks. However, being 10 or 9 and fearing they'd followed us from the woods, we get to the main road and call my mum. Eventually she came to get us. We're all shocked and crying a little, and my mum calls the police. They search the area but never find a sign of them. Thing is, there's never anyone in the woods. Maybe they were construction workers, but there wasn't any construction going on. The thing that really proves their bad intentions is that they chased us, 3 9-year-old girls, through the woods with weapons. That's why I always trust my gut. I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. I grew up in a small town in Norway, so stuff like this happening never really concerned me that much, considering this is a very safe place to grow up. Anyway, my brother played for our local soccer team with his classmates, and they were going away for like a 2-day tournament or something like that. They had to be accompanied by their parents because he's just 4 years older than me, and they were too young to be sent alone. Now this meant that no one could take care of me that weekend, so I had to come along with them all. Quite frankly, I wanted to, because this is quite a big city, and considering I was used to the rural town area, this would have been a great experience for me. So on one of the days while we stayed there, I got bored of watching the soccer matches and got approval to go explore the surrounding area, as long as I didn't stray too far away. I got my friend to come with me. We eventually stumbled upon a secluded dirt track, surrounded by woods. Now after walking for a while, we found a mattress. I thought this was odd. Now we were living at the edge of a field, really close to dense forest surrounding it, so we're kind of used to this. We start jumping on the mattress having fun, while all of a sudden, This creepy dude in probably his 50s or 60s sits down on the mattress staring at us. Ask him for our names and what we're doing there, and if we could show him our skills. I obliged to his request, showing him some tricks, but I was feeling scared at the time, because somehow, in my mind, I was convinced he's an alcoholic. Now I was scared, really, by any means of anyone who drank alcohol in my younger days. Anyway, a few minutes pass, and he says if we'd be so kind to him to retrieve his crutch that he stashed somewhere behind a building, pointing to a building like 500 meters away, which appears abandoned. I answered to him that we could. We started walking towards where he pointed, and my friend starts walking as well. I silently whisper in my friend's ear that he's an alcoholic and we should run. My friend didn't get the big deal, so I had to argue with him to get him with me, when finally he obliged. When we saw that we had a good distance from him, we ran as fast as we could towards the way we come. All I could hear in the background was a man shouting, "Hey, get back here!" I didn't turn to look once, and didn't stop running until I saw my parents. No idea what he was planning to do, but I know it was nothing good. Now, this story happened about 2 years ago, while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run for us. It required the collection of samples from several sites so they could recruit biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them collecting samples. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students, and a supervising professor. So we go up to the campsite in the late evening setting up our tents. One of the other students had a big container of split pea soup from home, sharing it with the others on the trip. Now I really don't care for pea soup, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They're in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning, in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours. The professor who was supervising us had originally set some rules, as people travel in at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now those rules were tossed out in order to make sure that we keep to our timetable, and collected all the required samples. We were just told, do your best to complete the work assigned as long as you do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream I'm supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't gonna happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was really peaceful until I smelled cigarettes. It was not the smell of the cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car where the cigarette butts have been left to ferment for weeks on end. I look around and see no one. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me, but minutes later, the smell had not faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or bush. I was unnerved that someone was trying to stay close enough to me to smell them for this long without saying a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. Now the smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelt it again. The woods were getting really dim now. Looking back on it, it was a stupid idea to stay out there so late, as just camping back along the journey was dangerous enough, even without a smoking stalker. Having put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I don't see anything that catches my attention. It's actually more correct to say I saw too many things in that dim light that might have actually been a head sticking out from behind a tree, or someone crouching down in low foliage. I did not like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I make much better time on my way back, even though it's dark, because I didn't have to stop taking any samples. Even so, I don't get back to camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back. Everyone but the professor's already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seems very tired and is heading back to his RV soon after I get packed up. I now head to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business as I knew some of the other students were feeling ill and needed the RV toilet more urgently than someone having to take a leak. I walk about 100 feet into the wood, finding a tree. As I go to turn back to the campsite, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily and I realized it's a cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow fade, moving slightly closer to the ground as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I did not know if they had seen me make my way to the woods or not, as the fire had been doused. The moon was only half full. There's not much light. I made my way slowly back to the camp as quietly as I can. Entering the RV to wake up the professor, I tell him about the smoking person in the woods, about the smell of cigarettes. However, when he got outside the RV, the ember's gone. My professor woke up the other student who hadn't come down with food poisoning. We take turns to watch over the camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I'm on guard duty, and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor, other students and I went to where I guess the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we find about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like somebody had been twisting, stabbing a knife and other sharp objects into it, as most of the outer layers of it had been chipped away. The professor decided the group should head back, even though we hadn't collected enough samples. We pack up camp, drive down the thin dirt trail without incident. Now the second we get onto the paved highway, a white van pulls out of the clearing, beginning to follow us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets that we did, only stopping briefly to then follow us, but eventually going away as we turned, heading towards our university campus. Everyone's freaked out, but it's around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office is closed. We decide to unload the RV, call it a night as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offer to help the professor catalogue and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it's another couple hours before I left the biological sciences building, now heading towards the dorm building that I lived in. I stepped out in the cool night air and began walking. My professor having left the building in the other direction to get to his car and drive home. It's a couple dozen feet outside the building, which is now locked. I'm hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I look around. About 25 yards away in darkness, I see that cherry light again, of a cigarette smouldering away. I'm pretty scared now, but hope it's only a student, or something, just anything else. I couldn't completely convince myself, as the musty cigarette smell was the same smell that I smelt in the woods. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I look over my shoulder and saw the cherry of a cigarette in the darkness. The smoker is now following me. This creeps me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off at a sprint towards my dorm building, looking over my shoulder for a few steps. Into my run, I see the cherry of the cigarette on the ground now, and a dark shape following me. I don't look back again, but I could hear someone running In the grass off the footpath. I got to my entrance to my dorm building, frantically waving my key card. As soon as I hear the soft beep, I jump in, closing and locking it quickly. I now very quickly turn around. Peering through the glass, I saw a dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I watch for a minute or so. Then, I see the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and the brim of a baseball cap before it disappears, replaced with the glow of a cigarette. I turn around, head up the stairs. By the time I make it to the window, there's no trace. And this is the last I ever saw of that person or that lone cigarette glow. So let me set the stage. At the time, I was living in Traverse City, Michigan. It's got a beautiful landscape for those wondering. Huge glaciers carved into the hills and Lake Michigan at your back. I rented a little townhouse with a longtime friend, a little ways outside the city. I'd gotten a hold of my old bicycle, which I'd shipped out from where my old home was, and was riding it around. That's how all of this got started. So it's actually my day off, and I decide to save gas, riding my bike into town. I geared up, checking my tires, and roared off. If I'd been big on riding my bike once upon a time, I wasn't the same now, and struggle a bit. Now if I'd been paying attention, I would have realised the constant downward slope I was on, and how biking up would be very difficult with my winter-lapsed muscles. But none of it mattered. I made it into town, did some shopping, met up with my roommate for dinner, and had a good time until the sun was setting. So I jump on my bike, pedaling off into the sunset. At first, I did alright, but that aforementioned incline wore me down. By the time I reached the last leg of my journey, it's pitch black. I was walking my bike, at which point the road faced me with a choice. To my left was a regular road, which was better lit, but also a longer trek to the townhouse now occupied. To my right was my more regular route to and from town. I drove it every day, and had used it to come into town that very day in fact. It was heavily wooded and unlit, but featured a shorter route with a steeper hill. I figured that since I was already walking, I may as well take the shorter, familiar path. So I turned on my bike's headlamp, into the great darkness through the woods. All went well for a bit. I trudged along, cursing myself for being so stupid and overconfident. Then I hear it. Footsteps to my right side in the woodland. I stand still, and they stop abruptly. They're in blackness. I debate what it might be, but as a veteran of the woods, I hope it's just local wildlife and continue on. The footsteps start up again, stopping when I stop, and just a hint of them later on. I started and stopped once more, to be sure I wasn't hearing things. The last time, the steps continued for a solid 10 seconds after I stopped, making me sure something or someone was out there. I still didn't know what, though logically leaning towards humans as probably humans. Now my mind stayed so on edge. I knew I had a utility knife in my purse, but I shoved that thought aside. I have enough martial arts training to know that a knife's a bad idea. I was more comfortable taking whoever's out there on barehanded, rather than escalate things with my knife. Instead, I call my roommate who's in town, give her my location and what's happening. She said she'd be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and started walking again. The footsteps started up again, now faster and out of sync with mine. That's when I got mad. I have a weird thing where fear makes me angry and hostile. Being stalked through the woods had pushed my buttons from terrified to murderous. So I now turned towards the woods, with a voice I didn't know I had saying, "How about you come on here? I'll rip you open." For the life of me, I don't know where I got those words from. It might have been a bad move. But the woods are now rather abruptly quiet. Nothing came at that moment. I stayed deadly still, staring hard, ready to jump at any moment. I now worry that they have a knife too. Then my roomie came. She turned the curve. I tossed my bike in her car and we get out of there. I was so scared when I got home I threw up, falling asleep for hours. I never actually got to find out who was out there, but I'm sure they were looking for a weak target, and thank God for me, that wasn't me that day. Now first off, this is the only creepy and scary-ish thing that's ever happened to me in my life, which is probably why it stands out in my memory. In hindsight, the location and general isolation probably added to my fears, but I felt like I was stumbling into the scene of a horror film. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college, moved back to my parents' home for free rent and food. This was for 9 months or so, because I was leaving the state for my graduate school. Now my parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the home, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks is certainly not ideal. But I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work, more to pass time than save up money. Anyway, the summer turns to winter, and I haven't got anything solid, but by then, I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' home, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business. I didn't really want to do it, since it didn't pay much, was short term, wasn't even a real office set up, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of the Midwest, I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash. And this guy was gonna pay me under the table as well. About that time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I paid him just $200 a month and cleared up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to go out of state. That's all I need to hear. I take the job. So my dad's friend had a construction type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but ultimately was more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large oogers I owned. Also other various drills, and then odds and ends like generators and other low-level construction or farming equipment that someone in that area couldn't afford to purchase but needed for the time. Now this was small and pop type of thing where everyone knew each other, and the office only opened on days when that someone was coming by, and was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and locals. Since I had minored in a business adjacent to the area my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms. Make sure nobody missed a payment date if there was a payment plan in place. Answer an email, or just discuss prices and whatnot. AKA super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about 90 years old, at the top of the little hill, and the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it for cheap, cleared it out, clears the bar, and fenced in the property to use it as a parking lot area to store their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted, as long as there's work that had to be done. So if things were slow, and there weren't any rentals for a couple of days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1, since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and all that. The office where I worked was on the 2nd floor of the building above the old bar, and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or a raccoon scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it's very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something usually occurred or felt off, I noticed it. One night during winter, it snowed for a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in because the roads are so bad. But I had an old SUV, and more than that, wanted to get out of the house. So I got into work at about 8 PM, and was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since believe me, when I say nobody ever showed up at night since we're literally in the middle of nowhere, no one would. I think the nearest occupied house was 2 miles away, and to even turn onto our short road, you had to not only be coming to our Pacific building, but would probably be coming to us only. It was a locals only type thing and very small, since a family had inherited a lot of money and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and show up here. So I'm jamming out to Fall Out Boy and having some coffee and kept glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish green light reflects onto the ground at the gate, causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom and come back up and get settled into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work then, when I glanced outside, see a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow below the light. It seems like it must have been a huge dog or animal that's just rolled around on the ground and then left. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, since I would have seen the movement to cause it otherwise. I shook it off and amused a dog, or maybe even a farm animal. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning, I was leaving. I get out of my car to lock up the gate, and I honestly pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow, but when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow now, but undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow, push their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up it looks like an angel. I used to do it when I was a kid, so I 100% knew for sure that's what it was. It was deliberately made underneath the light post, but not from a kid, from a large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of winter clothing. I look up and see what I already knew, that whoever made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through the window. So they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make the angel. Now, I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, so I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing cold for a few miles, stopping in front of our building, then doing a snow angel in the small amounts of time that I wasn't sitting in the front desk of my window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods, to the right of the building, so it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead would have come from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now once I realized that someone had just done this recently, so close to me, secretly in the middle of the woods, and I looked around, but didn't see anything amiss at all, and now I just want to get the hell out of there. When I got back in my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in 4 hours and might see the snow angel, assuming I did it, since they assumed I keep the gate locked. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young and felt like I might have been made fun of for it. So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over, kicking the snow around so it hit the angel, locked up, and went back to my car. No, I'm terrified at this point, and it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird, and it could have been an illegal hunter. Either way, the imprint was made when I was not there. I assumed they were long gone, but that's when I heard it. When I was getting into my SUV, there's the loudest high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the Witch and Wizard of Oz. Like someone was doing it fake on purpose to show that they're not scared of me, or to see how I'd react. It was close enough that I knew they probably could not see me, but I could not see them at all, since there's only the street light. I was under there, and there's no illumination around. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped. Then it's just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then laughing, getting louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for like 5 seconds, listening in panic. Now I spent a lot of time in that area. I know what coyotes and foxes sounded like at night with their high-pitched screeches. But this was different. This was an adult male trying to emulate a woman laughing. Like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it worked. After 5 seconds, I immediately filled with adrenaline, getting back in my car, driving as quick as I possibly can, slightly sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure out what had happened, telling my parents the story. Now, I didn't have any close friends left in that area that would do this, and if they did, they certainly would have brought it up to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that the closest people were a super old couple, so I highly doubt it was them. This means whoever it was went out in the woods, in the dead of night, in the freezing cold. I don't have any mental illnesses or issues like that. No one in my family does either. I didn't do drugs, so I knew it was in none of that stuff. I worked there for another 6 weeks or so, never having a single issue again, though I knew where my boss kept his gun. I always made sure it was there whenever I started working, and I certainly always kept the gate locked from now on. Thinking about this experience at night, the part that freaks me out the most about this is that he would have had to have waited up there for 2 hours just to do that laugh at me. This has honestly haunted me ever since it happened to me. So my mum married about 2 years ago. My dad died when I was 12, so she had been widowed for over 10 years. This new relationship was very whirlwind, with them meeting, dating, and getting married within 3 months. I don't know much about the guy, but my mum was happy, so I tried being supportive. She moved into his home in upstate Virginia and invited my fiance and I to spend a weekend in her new home, getting to know her and her husband. My mum's new home is very isolated. It sat on a few hundred acres of lovely rolling hills. Very picturesque. I was nervous about getting to know this guy, but really, trying to make the most of it. Over the course of our first day there though, I felt more and more uneasy. I didn't think it was weird, just silly. My mum's new husband was very welcoming and friendly. We were being made to feel very at home, yet I still couldn't shake this oppressive feeling. I finally chalk it up to my mum being remarried and I was upset about it. We spent most of the day wandering around outside since I felt worse when indoors. That night, my fiancé and I got ready for bed. When I turned around, he stopped mid-sentence and said, "What did you do to your back?" "Well, nothing, why?" "You have a large bruise." I turned around to look in the mirror. Now, I was really confused by this. I had no idea how I got the bruise there. Now, there's one window in our room looking out over a pitch black empty field, but I couldn't sleep until I hung something over the window. I felt so sure that someone was watching us. The next morning, I had a meltdown. I woke up and couldn't stop crying. I told my fiance we had to leave. He tries to calm me down by telling me all the things I'd been telling myself. My feelings are of anxiety due to the result of seeing my mum with someone else. The longer I spent with them, the easier it would come. But I just had to leave. It was only Saturday morning. We were supposed to stay until Monday, but I felt hysterical. I knew that I was on the verge of a panic attack, and my only concrete thought was that I had to stop crying long enough to make out excuses as to why we should get out of there. As soon as we were on the road, I felt a weight had been lifted. I was feeling embarrassed, hoping I hadn't insulted him. My fiancé broke the silence. "That bruise on your back, did you get a good look at it?" I had. It looked like somebody had torched the middle of my back, with fingers spread around wide, with the hand at a tilt. I want to make it completely clear that I had no injuries prior to this. It was like something you'd see out of a horror film when a demon attacks. That's the only way I can describe it. Almost like a bruise that you couldn't produce naturally if you wanted to. Now cut 3 weeks later, my mum comes to visit me. The entire time, she's hounding me to come and stay with her again. After finally trying to change the subject for the 5th time, I left with her. Before I even finished telling the story, her face is white as a sheet. She tells me that she's been feeling the same way in the home and hates it. She wants them to move out as soon as possible. And the real kicker? Her new husband's previous wife shot and killed herself right outside that same room with the window overlooking the dark fields.
Back in 2008, I graduated high school, but was still living at my parents' house, along with my younger brother and sister, who at the time were in high school and junior high respectively. It was Halloween Eve, meaning the next day was Halloween, and we were all asleep in our beds. Now, I have to tell you that although we lived on a nicer street, we lived in a town known for gangs and drug deals and random crazy weirdos. It was a little scary to hear gunshots and police sirens in the too close for comfort distance every night, but hey, it was home. Anywho, at about 4 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot on our front porch, followed by shouting and violent pounding on our front door. I, being curious but also scared out of my mind, creeped up to my second floor window and peered out at the front yard and an obstructed view of the porch. This was all I could see, and aside from hearing a regular stream of cursing and more pounding on the door, I had no clue what was going on for what seemed like hours, but in reality was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, and quite startlingly I might add, my brother came bursting into my room to ask if I was okay. I told him yes, but what the hell was going on? He told me this. Some weirdo was at our front door. He had knocked, aka tried to break down, our front door, and my dad heard and went to go see what was happening. He peered through the glass and saw the man on our porch, to which he asked what was wrong, without opening or unlocking the door. The man answered, "They're after me," repeatedly while glancing back behind him. My dad, seeing that there was no one behind him on the dimly lit street, asked if he would like to use our phone. He said yes, so my dad grabbed our house phone and handed it to him through the doorway he had cracked open. The man then tried to push his way in, but thankfully my dad stopped him and shut and locked the door. He then proceeded to call the police. On the phone the man had opted not to take. That was the story up to the point where my brother came to check on me. At that point, the man had started screaming profanities, yanking the door handle back and forth violently, and pounding on the walls. And then, I heard the shatter of glass. The man had taken a chair from our front porch and thrown it through the front window, which led to my parents' bedroom. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I was bawling at this point, knowing for sure that he was now in our house. And remember, I woke up to what I thought was a gunshot. I thought about how he was going to kill my parents first, and then run up the stairs to kill me and my brother. My mind raced at all the horrible things that could be happening downstairs, when amazingly, the police pulled up right at that moment. They immediately came into the house and detained the man. Apparently, he had climbed through the window, cutting himself on the glass, and crawled on all fours through my parents' bedroom and through the kitchen, finally ending up on our living room floor, where he just laid down and bled all over our carpet. He didn't have any weapons on him, despite my original theory of him having a gun. I guess I thought, in my rudely awakened state, that the pounding on the door was a gunshot. He was apprehended before he did anything to anyone in my family, thankfully. We think he was just some druggie who was hallucinating that someone was chasing him. No charges were filed, and we never saw the man again. After the police and ambulance left, my dad cleaned up what he could of the bloody mess, and we all went to bed. Unfortunately, all of us forgot about my little sister, who was in the downstairs bedroom in the back of the house. No one had gone to check on her, and no one told her what was happening, so she spent the entire night cowering under her blankets, thinking something could still be happening. Oops. We have all since apologized to her. So, that's my story. Even though it was the most frightening experience of my life thus far, at least something good came of it. Since he bled all over our carpets, our insurance paid for new carpet, which we already desperately needed, and it was enough to carpet several rooms, way more than were actually ruined. So there's that.
When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays, even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the home between was creepy to say the least. She was over 6 foot tall. She wore locking chains around her neck, a dress and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden, in the back, or when she was washing the outside of her home. Scrubbing the actual building. Weird. She often did so. During these times, she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us that Satan himself was coming for us. Weird, I know. The adults told us to leave her alone and avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunt's and grandparents' house because when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy. Now it was hella creepy, and we never went alone. Now during one Halloween, one of the cousins dared us to trick-or-treat her home. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell, and there was a lot of banging noises in the home, suddenly like doors slamming. When she answered the doors, she had an actual severed head in her hands. We all went screaming, running away. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop, and we probably shouldn't be bothering her, and deserved it. About a month later, my parents got a phone call, and apparently the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was ringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She pulled it around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped out and started kicking. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents' and another neighbour's home. She had actually been bringing the dirt up, putting it in the raised garden beds. She also had a shrine of sorts underground, which had several severed heads around it, real human heads. God knows where she got them. Now luckily my auntie survived, but had a long scar across her neck.
Let me clarify. This happened during my college's Halloween celebration a few years ago, and it's the most terrifying experience of my life. One of my roommates, some friends and myself, left to go to a party around dusk, and we were catcalled by a group of 3 drifters, or homeless people. We thought nothing of it and went on our merry way. About 4 hours later, we were going back to our apartment to change shoes. High heels and messed up streets are hell when you've been drinking. When one of the drifters calls out to me,
"Hey beautiful, how about a kiss?"
Me being a little drunk and sassy, I reply, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and horror, he says,
"Hey, my friend here likes the ladies."
A homeless girl comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kiss me on the mouth. My friend picks me up and throws me over his shoulder. I proceed to flip the fuck out in my apartment, shrug it off, and we venture back out. Well, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and then I see the 3 drifters again. I try not to show that I'm shitting bricks when they ask me where they can find a liquor store. I point down the street to the Kroger, and they say,
Okay, you can show us.
I'm a small woman, and they shoved me into their vehicle. I think, naively at the time, that they will literally let me out at the grocery store. Except it's closed because it's after midnight. I plead for them to let me out of the car, but they keep saying,
The power does what it wants.
and headed away from the safety of the campus area, onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next 4 hours, I visited 3 states with them, all while pleading for my life. I'll never forget how they kept saying,
The power does what it wants.
and talking about how they're going to have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, that I would never graduate college or see my family again. They pulled into a gas station, and I slipped out the vehicle, just to be grabbed again. But I screamed my head off for the clerk to help. That's when they started talking about taking me to the cliff. I mentioned that my family is full of police officers, and that they're probably already looking for me, how they're committing a federal crime, and that I won't press charges if they take me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started to feel sorry for me, because she started to say, Guys, she's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get any worse. They took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl shoved me toward the cop and yelled, The power does what it wants, and tonight it lets you live. I've never been so happy to sit in a cruiser. They pursued them, but I don't know if they were ever caught. My roommate dropped out of college and joined the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful walking at night. Always keep your cell phone with you, if possible, and call the police if you see suspicious people near your apartment. I had a brush with death that day, and I am so grateful for the time I have now.
When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I honestly loved these times. I would stay up later than anybody else because I could. Well, one night I was asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. This was during Halloween, so I thought someone was playing a prank on me. I was a little scared, so I crept forward to the bay windows of my living room, peeking out towards the porch. Now, sitting on my porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood, holding a giant kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I was finally able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry, telling me that it's a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept on crying and screaming until he had enough, snatched my arm, dragging me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally, we got to the door. He opens it, swinging it open, and said, "There's nothing there." To this day, I've never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face then again. The woman turned, stared at both of us, slowly standing up with the knife. My dad slams the door shut and got my mum to call the police while he went to get his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge cracks the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Someone murdered my husband. It's not me though." My dad now told her that the police were coming. She freaked out, grabbed the knife and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbours' houses. I never slept in that room again.
My dad was the coolest guy on the block, probably because he's one of 3 black dads who lived in our town. The population is around 98% Caucasian, and that's not an exaggeration. He was a state police officer, intimidating, wore Oakleys before the hipsters, and he was generally a rough-sounding person. Damn, do I miss him. But the one thing he feared the most was Halloween. He would tell my sister and I stories at night about his life when he was in high school in the slums of New Jersey, and that every Halloween, crazy things would happen. He may have been pulling our legs a bit, but we didn't care. When Halloween would roll around, he would take us out while Mom stayed back to trick or treat. One night, in 5th grade, my sister and I were dressed as a witch and a 50s poodle skirt girl. Dad held our hands, walking to the last street, when I realized I'd lost my mom's scarf she let me borrow. She loved that thing, so we walked all the way back towards the darker corner of the street. It's by the woods and a small stream, but when it's dark, you can't see anything. Dad said he'd seen something and walked towards it. When he got there, he started slowing down. He was staring at something in the dark that we couldn't see. My sister called out to him if he found Mom's scarf. He told her to be quiet and started crouching down, looking into the distance. For several moments, we stood there, waiting. I could make out the scarf above his head, tied to a branch. He grabbed the scarf, still staring in the dark, and started backing away. Then Dad screamed and sort of shuffled backwards. It was a low, throaty scream like he was furious. He was swearing too, but I don't remember what. Whatever Dad had been staring at then bolted out the trees and ran down the street opposite of where we lived. It was a little child, probably a boy, from his silhouette, in a black costume with skeleton bones on the front and a skull mask. When my sister and I tried to go over and see what happened, my dad yelled for us to stay back. He got onto his ancient cell phone and called Mom to come and pick us up. His next call was to the local police. We left before we could see anything, but the next day, Mom told us about the dead, skinned animals that had been found. By the time us kids could look, they taped off the place and taken out the bloody animals, but there were still stains on the pavement and the smell was pretty bad. The kids talked about it at school a little, and I was curious if they ever caught the boy. Nothing came out in the local papers though, and it was quickly forgotten. Eventually, Dad could have told me more, but unfortunately, it was the last Halloween we'd ever spend together. But I do remember him and Mom arguing for the next couple of days about ever letting us go trick-or-treating again.
Back when I was in college, there was an old dormitory that was empty and locked up. The first floor windows were covered up with thick black curtains, and the doors had chains and padlocks on them. Well, my second year of school, I got my ETM certificate and started working from campus EMS squad. That was easily my coolest job ever, and there were perks other students couldn't get. One was that there's keys for everything, so obviously we use those keys to go everywhere. Most places were pretty boring. My now best friend, who was the other EMT I worked with, decided to make the old dorm a hangout place. We would sneak in with friends and drink there on the weekends or nights we didn't have class. We usually stayed on the first floor on just one wing of the dorm, the one closest to the back entrance. We didn't stray because the place was dirty, having cobwebs. So one night, we're drinking in one room. We set up tables and chairs that we seized. We're working together. Now nobody was missing when someone very close to our room very loudly said, "Who the hell's there?" To which one of us drunkenly responded, "Who do you think it is?" Then a very confused voice responded back, "You're not coming with me then, John." They sounded like they were talking and walking away from us, towards the center of the building, away from the stairwell. Incidentally, none of us are named John. A few minutes later, we could hear on the floor above us, a very old building floor that's super thick, a rumbling sound that kind of shook the walls. The rumbling stops right above us, with a giant crash. Now things are getting creepy. We all run up the stairs, make our way to the hallway, above the one we were hanging out at. Right at where our round table would be, there was a giant filing cabinet on wheels. It was just there. No one else was there. You could see the wheel tracks on the floor because it was dusty as hell. But there were no other footprints around besides our own. We all bolted without getting our stuff, not stopping to get our booze or even turn off the radio or turning off our battery powered lantern. So obviously we've had the life scared out of us. Now we waited a few days. A friend of mine and I went in to get it. First we go to the window and see if we can see if our stuff is there. My friend looks in. I didn't. He said that somebody's in the doorway. I thought he was acting retarded because of what happened the other night. We sneak in, make it to the room, get our stuff. Somewhere down in towards the center of the building, we hear a door shut. It's completely dark that way. We now hear a door even closer open. We don't wait to find out what the hell that's about. So I'm not a person who believes in supernatural stuff. The same goes for my friends. We decide that we need to figure out what's going on with this building. So about 6 of us devise a pretty easy plan to go about with. We circle the building one night, checking all the doors and windows to make sure they're locked. Then, we went to our usual entrance. We actually left 2 people near the entrance to make sure no one can come in or out. Then, rest started going from dorm to dorm, checking to make sure that no one else was there. We'd say hello, and obviously get no response. We make it through our hallway. We then start hanging out and our tensions ease up. Now one of the people outside the door moves up to where we stopped, and we go to the 2nd floor where the filing cabinet is. Because it's back at the original place with the wheel tracks and no footprints, tension in the group rises up. We start doing the whole hello and no response thing again. We get about halfway through the hall and one of us gets the idea of saying, "Oh, come on, it's your friend Johnny." There's a giant thud below us, muffled screams from the two we left as lookouts probably say something along the lines of, "What the hell was that?" A giant thud behind us on the same floor, where nobody could have been because we went through those rooms and we would have noticed somebody else slamming on a door behind us. It turns into a race to get back out the way we come, past the doors that were jammed shut. As we get into our hallway, we hear doors opening and closing in a way that suggests something's coming after us from the center of the building again. Now, it being Halloween at this time, we're already scared enough, but this was ridiculous. We get a few hundred yards away before we all stopped running, making sure we all made it. Now, after we got back, we all agreed never to mention what happened again, or play with whatever supernatural spirits were lingering around. This is by far the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
So when I was young, I went to that one house in town where the residents went all out and probably spent thousands of dollars getting the place perfect for Halloween. Now this place was insanely well done, and I mean really freaking good. Albeit, even as an adult, it competed with professional haunted houses. I believe the year was either 1999 or 2000, because I went as Darth Maul. I remember being literally scared out of my mind the previous few years, and I hoped the badassery of my character would provide me with some sort of courage. They blocked off the scene with a black tarp, and had everything you could ever want to see at such a house. A psycho shower scene with a zombie crawling out of the toilet, ghouls and imps climbing the tree, blood, gore, strobe, spog, everything. I remember feeling terrified, even with my double lightsaber. Even though I was scared to death to walk through it, I always admired the workmanship, as I knew that the props they had were either really expensive or took some good effort to make. To this day, I have never seen anyone have as horrible a yard as they did. As always, every year, I saw the house owners sitting on their porch, reveling in the terror they brought to the neighborhood and handing out candy. So as I nervously crossed the yard, past flying banshees and impaled corpses, I noticed the main attraction at the end of the line. There, on what I guess was probably the driveway, was the bottomless pit attraction. The illusion bewildered and chilled me, and though it was only lit by a lone light bulb, it made the box glow like a low-burning furnace. I must have stared at it for a while, when suddenly I heard a cough and a low hushed voice to my right. I don't really remember what was said, but I want to say it sounded something like,
"Hey, check this out."
or
"Hey, I want to show you something."
in a gruff, hoarse tone. I looked over and at first saw nothing but the wide gate to what was clearly the side of the owner's house. There was just a faint amount of light from the glowing pit to illuminate the outlines of the gated fence. After adjusting my eyes, I noticed a figure standing completely still. In fact, it was so still, I remember thinking it was just another static prop. My young mind just didn't register a lot of this, and was still looking for the voice I heard, not realizing it had come from the figure, who I could still only barely make out. After a few moments, I heard the voice again. I realized it came from the figure and began to approach it. This was obviously a stupid idea, but in comparison to everything else that was happening around me, this figure seemed anything but imposing. So I cautiously approached the figure, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly, the figure began to move, and consequently I froze solid. The light from the amber glow lit up his face, just enough for me to make out his features. This I remember clearly. It was a scraggly and rough-looking man, with a coarse gray beard and yellow teeth. His weathered and tattered clothing looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. He was smiling at me, though I had no idea why, but it unsettled me greatly under the hellish glow of the light bulb behind me. It felt wrong. It was as if, at that moment, I had acquired some clarity and realized his presence here obviously was not part of the show, and considering I already saw the owners, clearly did not belong on the property. I screamed and ran out of there as fast as I could to the exit, not looking behind for a second. I probably got a few looks from the other kids around, but as I found my parents waiting outside, I told them about the man I saw. I saw one of the owners approach and ask if everything was alright. I said something like, I didn't like the old man by the gate. He looked at me for a second and said, "What man?" I never went there again. Let's not meet, creepy shadow man.
When I was about 13, my mum and dad invited round our previous neighbours from the block of flats that we used to live in until I was around 5 years old. Anyway, I'd been sent to bed but could hear everyone talking about this and that, until the woman neighbour said, "Hey, Dixie's mum, do you remember when Dixie used to complain that there was someone in his room? Well, there's a family that just moved in to the floor above and have a 3-year-old son. He's complaining of the exact same thing that Dixie did." Now this creeps me out. I have no recollection of any of this. So the next day, I said to my mum, "Do you remember this?" And she said, "Don't you?" Then she tells me about all the weird stuff that used to happen. Footsteps up and down the hall, stuff going missing. She said the final thing to happen was when she is listening to a record one day. It began to slow down, like someone was holding a finger on it gently until it come to a stop. My mum finally snaps at this point, shouting, "Will you leave us alone?" As soon as she did this, the record went straight back to playing normally, and we never experienced anything again. I've never experienced anything like that since, and these days, I'm quite skeptical of such stories, but I believe my mum. Strangest thing is how I found out about it from someone else 10 years later around Halloween. Creeps me out even now thinking about it. Me and my roommate had a pretty big Halloween party. There's cake, balloons, booze. We're having a great time when one of Steven's friends tells him he'll give him $100 to go gamble with him. My roommate says hell yeah. They get ready to leave. So does everyone. The party ends. So eventually, everyone leaves and it's just me. I clear up a bit, turn all the lights off in the apartment and set my bedroom light, get into my nightwear and sit on my bed to watch TV. As I'm sitting there, I hear this dragging noise, followed 15 seconds later by a light blop. This actually goes on for a good half hour, but I ain't seeing anything out of the ordinary, so I figure maybe something's gone wrong with the fish tank. I keep hearing this for 15 minutes, thinking nothing of it, go check on the fish, when some movement by my bedroom door catches my attention. One of the balloons we used for the party had a big number 0 on it. It's now sitting at the threshold of my door, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. I just stare at it like, what the hell? Then, as if on cue, It moves inside my room, dragging the plastic bottom on the ground about half a foot, floats up half a foot, floats forward about a foot very slowly, then plopping the weight back down on the ground. Then it just sits there again and does nothing. A few minutes later, it would repeat. All this time I'm sitting there horrified, and the balloon continues to move forwards towards me and my bed until it plops down right next to me, right in my face. I jumped up and backed away, searching for a logical explanation. I ended up popping the balloon. I didn't sleep that night. A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to before in order to look for a place to live. My boyfriend flew with me, and before the trip, I researched all sorts of apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. Now the landlord had actually filed over some information for us. Now he said to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm I'm coming. I did. He didn't answer. So my boyfriend and I started walking up to the home and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. "You coming?" he said, sounding like an older man, having this very strange, slow way of talking. But I just thought he was older, and did so because, yeah, we're at the house now, coming up to the front. He gets extremely upset. We? Oh yeah, I have my boyfriend with me. You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that. Now it had never crossed my mind to tell him this information, since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me. He was just helping me while looking for apartments. I told the man so. After a very long pause, he said, "I'm sorry. It's just, sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you very soon." Then he hung up. Now I told my boyfriend about what the man had said. He was immediately weirded out. He wanted to leave, but in honesty, there were very slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay in case it's a place. As we're discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're gonna view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, weird eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the home to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're weirded out. But this isn't enough for us to bail yet, nah. And we looked at each other wondering what to do, and the landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall, very strong looking. His eyes are completely blank, empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hands, but mine are dirty." "From what?" we said. "Work." followed by silence is his reply. He has a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to do school for? What other places am I considering? Is my boyfriend moving here too? I tried to keep my answers as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord the same kind of questions, which he refuses to answer. Then he says, "Let me show you the basement," out of nowhere. At this point, I should have noped out of there, but I didn't. I kept on thinking and telling myself that this was an eccentric old man from a small town, and that we're just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, but he followed us as the man led us back to the house, away from the street, sort of to this detached part which is a shed. He opens the door, and we see that the stairs leading downstairs go to utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, and the light doesn't come on. Normally the response for this is, "Oh crap, the light's out," or something like that. But he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. Then he stood there without moving in the dark and said, "Aren't you coming down?" "There's nothing to see if the light's out," said my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks up the stairs, closes the door to the basement without saying a word. He left us then, but came back, taking us back inside. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensured. He now says that the only exit is the front door, locked automatically. When my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, he gets really upset and told him to leave it alone. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms, kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them away when he caught us looking. On Craigslist, and in person, the man claimed that there was a grand student already living there, but the evidence seemed very low. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things a 20-something-year-old might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge or anything. There was maybe 3 t-shirts in the closet. The supposed grand student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went or how long he'd be renting the home for. Finally, the man had showed us every single room but one. This one he refuses to open, claiming it's just the attic. And we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished. There was furniture up there. It will smell bad. The last one I believed, because it smelled terrible. Now finally we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretending to get to his car first, because he needed something. When he thought we turned the corner, he slowly made his way back home. Now we're fixated on the idea that something was terribly wrong here. We found out 3 things later. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of townspeople. There was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company as he claimed to on Craigslist. and that he had listed his home address as a real house that we had been touring, but that's also where the grand student lived. Apparently it's known as weird and to be avoided. It's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm so glad I didn't go there alone.
Me and my girlfriend Kylie decided to buy an apartment together. She was looking on Craigslist and saw a really luxury penthouse apartment for only $300 a month. It was really nice and it looked over the city, had really nice bedding and a big bathtub, just everyone's dream apartment. Kylie calls the man and he said he's happy to show her the apartment, and she said, "Me and my boyfriend are on our way." What's weird is the man on the phone was like, "Oh, alright. I didn't know you were having people come with you." Kylie says to me that we should just see what it looks like and just leave. I agreed and wait outside the apartment. It was really rusty looking and had tall grass around it. We looked at the ad and both looked at each other as we saw a greasy looking man come up to us, and he had a white tank top on and tan shorts with a rusty beard and braided hair. Kylie and I were kind of looking at each other in disgust. He pointed his finger at me and said, "You stay downstairs, young man." For me, being from Canada and being young, I have never witnessed anything like this in my life. Now I should say, Kylie's from Australia and she's pretty tough, so if this man had tried anything, she would kick his ass. I waited downstairs and I heard a faint scream coming from the basement. I didn't think much of it, as I thought it was just a kid outside. Then I heard it again and decided to call the police, and told them what was going on. They came after 20 minutes, and Kylie pulls me outside, and says she's not going to get this place at all. I told her about the screams in the basement. The man was arrested and wanted in another state, and the screaming downstairs came from a woman named Stephanie, who was interested in the apartment, which in reality, Kylie said it was a really dirty house, with women's clothing everywhere. I now know to never search stuff on Craigslist again. Me and Kylie now live in a really nice rent-to-own home in Oregon County, and all I have to say is don't always believe what you see on Craigslist.
Back in my younger days, when I was still living with roommates, I had what turned out to be one of the most dangerous encounters of my life. I was looking to move and was about to leave to see a place in the perfect location. Found it on Craigslist at a good price. There were two seemingly professional male roomies. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggests that he goes along because a place is nearby and they'll have to meet at some point anyway. So we get there and I introduce myself, and the one roommate seems a little taken aback by the fact that I have someone with me. I suppose it could be seen as unusual to bring your boyfriend, but oh well. The damage has already been done, I think to myself. If they don't allow me in their room simply because he is with me, I can't deal with it. Now, let's just see the place. The apartment is huge. We're both subtly impressed, until we turn the corner of the living room and see it. A 2-camera setup with a light pointed at the couch. There's a guy sitting on the couch that is introduced as the other roommate. He jumps off the couch and gives my boyfriend the same weird look. I now realise what they're looking at, and it's disappointment. I shot to my boyfriend a quick look of understanding, and we silently decide to continue with the tour, as to not escalate the situation. I casually joke that it's nice they have a camera, so I can videotape myself for auditions. Then they laugh nervously and say, "Yeah, that's what we were doing." He then brings us over to my room and is literally showing me a broom closet. You cannot get a single bed in there. I take this opportunity to get out of there by saying, "Oh, that's not too bad. I have a queen bed. I won't be able to fit. Thank you for the time though." When we get out to the street and walk around the corner, we look at each other in stunned silence.
So this happened a few years ago, and I just recently remembered it. For a little background, I'm a 20-year-old female from Germany. When I was 17, I was in a long-distance relationship, and was desperate for some extra cash, because I spent most of my pocket money on train tickets to see my boyfriend. So I put up a babysitting ad on the German equivalent of Craigslist. Soon I got a call, not an hour after putting up the ad. I was greeted by the voice of a man. The conversation started off innocently enough, with him telling me that he had an 8-year-old and needed someone to watch him after school, as both him and his wife were working full-time. I expected him to ask me about my experience with kids, or something to that effect, but instead he went on to tell me that his son could be a little difficult. I told him I didn't mind, and that I'd find a way to deal with it. Would you hit him if he's being naughty? I was taken aback by this question. I'm very against violence against children. Even spanking is child abuse in my eyes. I told the man that, and that I'd do my best to find a non-violent way to deal with his problems. But what if he was hitting you? Would you hit back? I replied to him with a firm no. At this point I started to feel angry, as it dawned on me that this was obviously a common occurrence for this child to be hit. He kept on throwing scenarios at me and asked if I would discipline his son in that situation, and that his old babysitter apparently frequently spanked him. I eventually told him, as politely as I could, that if a parent chooses to use spanking as a form of punishment, that was either their business, but as a babysitter, I had no right to hit a child. He was silent for a while, then asked me if I would bathe his son. I honestly don't remember what my exact response was, but it definitely wasn't yes. He went on explaining that his son was supposed to take a bath every Thursday, and that he hated taking baths. He wanted to know how I would make him get in the bathtub, and if I would strip him naked. At this point, red flags came up. I dodged the question as best I could, and said something to the effect of, "Things like this are a parent's job, not a babysitter's," and that the parent should make him take his baths in the evening after work, but he kept pressing, asking things of an obscene nature, if I'd wrestle his son naked, etc. I just kept saying no, until he eventually called me back. I removed my phone number from the ad immediately, and told people to contact me via email instead. I also got a new phone number, for reasons unrelated to this unsettling phone call. So luckily I never heard from him again. I just hope his son, if he actually had one, which I honestly doubt, is just okay.
When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It's a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It's cheap to rent, close to campus, so the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, called Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair, wearing pale makeup. She seemed really nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout the dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like him, so it didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she said if I'd seen her room yet. I said no, so she took me there. At first I was kind of hesitant, but agreed. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printouts of him everywhere. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it, nor would I. It was creepy. The whole night, she had been saying how I look like him. It's now obvious to me that she's obsessed with him. A few weeks passed. I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out for like 2 minutes and would be slurring her words, so I suspected that she's drinking a lot. Sometimes, she wouldn't say anything and just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised, saying, "Hello, Beth." Then, there's a long awkward pause, and she'd let out this high-pitched giggle. It was very uncomfortable being around her. She gave me chills. So one night, I woke up at around 2 AM because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and the lights are off, but I could still see Beth standing at the door, face against it. I can now see that she's turning to look back and forth over and over again. Every time she turned the bolt, she muttered my name. Seeing her standing in the dark, mumbling my name really freaks me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like the bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly go back to my room and try to sleep. So one night, I'm watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned the living room lights on, forcing me to pause the movie, which is really annoying. She then said to me if I want to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy setting to say the least. Now, 10 minutes into her story, she was so riled up. She began screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbours were gonna call the police, and she wasn't listening to me when I said to her to lower the volume. Amidst all of the screaming, one thing that really freaks me out, she's in such a fit that she says, "I'll slit his throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl is capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen became more and more worrying to me, disturbing to say the least. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty quick, went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the home with her. What's worse is that there's no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front to barricade. Now there's this one time that I wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turn on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see through the opening of the door. She was so drunk, having this intense, crazy look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed, yelling at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I could not fall asleep. The next morning, when I went out the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough now. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after, she contacted me. I was at the movies, and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned it on, and to my shock, I received at least 40 text messages in the last 2 hours. They're just insane, from "Hi, how are you?" to "I hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard of her again. I always wondered if I hadn't set my dresser in front of the door, would she have quietly come into my room to murder me?
I am a 25-year-old guy. This happened 4 years ago. It's still unresolved, if you'd like to call it that. This Friday night, I had gotten off work around 5:30 PM and was ready to make plans for the night. I was recently single, and with asking readers not to judge, I had made up for lost time. I had met a few new girls, but most other single girls I knew didn't think my breakup was for real because my girlfriend and I had been together for such a long time. As the type to stay away from clubs, I began exploring online dating. While at home, I started looking at girls near me on POF. For some reason, that night, I really wanted to be in the company of a woman, and the hour I'd spent with no suitable response began to wear my patience down. I eventually looked on Craigslist and posted personal ads. Now, I know Craigslist is not the best place to meet people, but at this point I was thinking with the other head, if you know what I mean. I went out for an hour or two, and when I returned, I noticed that I had some responses to my ad. Mostly spam, obvious escorts and a catfish. I may have been desperate, but I wanted someone I felt comfortable with, on a friend and personal level. After weeding out, I saw one response that looked legit. I could tell she'd read the ad, and it was an actual written response. She even included a few pics, which all of them she looked normal. She was cute, but didn't look like a model from a magazine or anything like that. They just looked like selfies she took herself. In hindsight, there was something about this that I didn't catch at first, which is important to the rest of the story. I use a dummy email for Craigslist, and I've set it up so that pictures don't download automatically. I learned my lesson after posting an ad for a table and getting a dick pic. However, these pics showed up right away as soon as I opened the email. This will tie in later. After some back and forth, I decide I'll come over. She gives me the address and I see that it's an apartment building. Even better, as I'm always thinking of safety. I didn't want to go inside an actual home. I get there and email that I'm outside, and just give me the exact building and apartment number. She tells me to walk outside and walk to the courtyard, so she can make sure that I am who I say I am. Understandable. I said I was 5'11". It would be scary on her end if someone 6'5" was out there. After seeing that it was truly me, she says she has to tell me something. I'm thinking the worst here, and I start to think of what it could be. Then she tells me, "I'm really a man, I'm sorry." Now I'm pissed, but that washes over immediately as I feel played. I'm prepared to take my loss and quickly head back to my car when I got more emails. He tells me to come in, and that he can give me money, or cook, or have drinks or whatever. He sounds like he just really wants a company, but I'm sorry, but I'm just not chilling with some guy. He then sends me the last email that simply says, $200, 2 hours, no touching, no sex. It catches my eyes, and I walk up to his door. Stupid, I know, but at this point I'm thinking I'll just take his $200, maybe knock over some of his things for tricking me, and just leave. My better judgment gets the best of me, thankfully, and I'm about 5 feet from his door, and I turn around and leave. I decided this was a sign that I needed just to stay at home for the night. I stopped at a 7-Eleven to grab a beer. I get back in my car and start reading through Facebook. All of a sudden I get a Facebook message from someone I didn't know, who I can tell is a fake profile, saying, "Sorry, can you please come back?" I get upset of the nerve of this guy, and then air escapes from my throat. How on earth did he get my personal Facebook? I used a fake email that has no ties whatsoever to my real name. I message him back, "Leave me alone, I apologise but I'm not interested." The man then threatened me by saying something along the lines of, "You should listen," then said my name. Of my job. It was listed on my Facebook, but it was my first ever camp job before college, so it really didn't mean much. I told the man, "Either stop or I'm coming back with some help to make you stop." I didn't get any more messages after that. I deleted the Facebook messages, deleted my email account and went home. 2 days later, I'm on my computer, when again I get a Facebook message from the guy that says, "Black shirt." I don't even begin to give the time of day to decipher that and delete the message. I block the man. 10 seconds later, I come to the realization that I'm wearing a black v-neck. I look at the window as if I'm suspecting someone to be peering inside, when I remember I'm on the 11th floor of a high-rise building. There's only one way in, and the door has a strong deadbolt lock. Whenever I come in, I quickly close the door and lock the door due to my pets, so I knew there was nobody physically in my place with me. I'm startled, but I brush it off as a scare tactic. I bet like 6 in 10 guys right now are wearing a black t-shirt. The man just seemed like a lonely troll, and I'm sure he was doing this to everyone who felt trapped in his Craigslist scheme. I closed my computer down and went on with my day. 2 days later, I'm sitting back at my computer as usual, when once again the guy messages me. I already know it's going to be some nonsense, so I'm going to do a mark as read / delete thing, so he can't see that I've read it. I see the partial message that says, "Black and red robe." I literally scoot in my chair back and stare at my computer. Right behind me, I'm sure reflecting in my screen, if the light would have hit it correctly, sat a glow with black water and red land. A friend got it from me because it was different. I understood it right away. This man could access my webcam. I then thought back to my original email. He penetrated through my firewall, and he somehow tied my fake email to my real name. I am pretty good with computers, but I'm the first to take note when I'm dealing with someone who is a genius with computers. This man gave off every vibe that he knew what he was doing in the computing world, and maybe even the hacking world. I slam it shut and pace around the room, mumbling to myself that I'd been so careless to get in a position like this. I run to a drawer and scramble for the black electrical tape. I find some and place it over the cam. I am officially freaked out at this point. I'm not a tough guy by any means, and I hold my own in most situations, but I felt out of control. I delete my Facebook and every social media account as well. I spend the next 10 minutes prioritising my online presence and cleaning out my computer. I keep the tape on and try to get on with my week. 2 days later I come home from work around 6 PM. I come in and close the door and greet my pets. I see a white piece of paper that was slid under my door. This usually either meant maintenance had a project going on, or we were late on rent, or the elevators were broken. We got a lot of those elevator letters. I pick it up and place it on the table as I get my dog to stop jumping on me and put my bag down. I pick up the note and it says, "Blue doormat." To give you some background, during my drunken escapade, my ex and I brought a bright blue doormat that we were both 100% certain was green and would match the green carpet outside our door. We then sobered up the next morning and we realised how off we were and decided to keep it as a joke. This man had been inside my building and at my door. The thing is, it was a big building. You would need to know the building number, address, floor number and apartment number. My dog wasn't going crazy, but I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. I swung the main closet doors open. Nothing. I ran into the bedroom and swung the closet doors open. Once again, nothing. I raced in the bathroom and opened the shower curtain. Nothing. The man had not been inside, but he had been close enough. I'm not the type to call the police, but I felt that I didn't know what to do. After sleeping on it, I called 911 the next day, and asked for a non-emergency. After a hold, I'm connected to a lady and tell her what's going on. She says she can't do anything, but gives me the number of the police of the city where the man lived. I call and speak to an officer, and basically tell him that I'm not trying to press charges or anything, but can someone please go over there and scare him or something. I could tell the cops wanted nothing to do with me, but I kept his ear, probably because he could hear a rational young man basically pleading with him to help. He said he would send someone out there. I get a call a few hours later from the station. The cop I spoke to before says that there was no answer at the door. He told me that he went to speak with a leasing officer, and the sales manager, and the only person who lived there was an old lady who had been there forever. I froze for a moment. The guy wasn't even at that apartment when I came there. I started to think, Was he in a different apartment? Was he waiting in a car? Behind a tree or somewhere in the courtyard? I personally think he was somewhere inside a neighbouring apartment, just watching. However, I had never felt so careless. The cop told me to reactivate my account and just wait for another message. I did that for a month or so before shutting it down for good, before making another one. I just felt more comfortable that way. I never had another encounter, and I've since moved and gotten a new computer. I got the courage to go up to that apartment twice. The first time I didn't get a response when I knocked. The second time I was greeted with an older lady, similar to what the cop had told me. I told her what happened and she assured me she had no sons or nephews or anything like that. She left me with a lecture telling me to be safe. That was 4 years ago. I'm 25 now, and to look back at my 21-year-old self, I would never even consider meeting someone online like that now. Please, if it seems sketchy, it is sketchy.
This happened last year, around this season, while I was broke, struggling to make ends meet. I just moved out and didn't want to resort to going back to my mum and dad's house. Anyway, I was so desperately trying to find anything. I went to Craigslist for caregiver, housekeeping type gigs to make some quick cash. While I was searching for a full-time position, I knew I wasn't going to be there too long. How bad could it be, right? After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who advertised as being disabled, who needed help with his morning routine and whatnot. Now, I knew it could be difficult for some, and I felt a bit bad. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his town's house late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way from me, but I was so desperate and didn't mind. He even said to me that I could spend the night there if I needed. Once I got there, I found he was a decent looking man in his late 30s or early 40s with a cane. He paid me $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained to me that he's ex-military, coming back from surgery recently. Things start to get weird when he offered me some wine, commenting on how cute he thinks I am. Now honestly, I should have seen this as a big red flag, but again, I was super poor and didn't want to cheat him, so I gave him the benefit of doubt. He then led me to his bedroom where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified that he was turned on and wanted me to lather him up. He then said, "Do I want to take my clothes off for him?" I said no. Now after giving him a normal shower, he got out and said he's heading to bed but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room where I was to stay was right next to his, and though I was tired, I was very on edge. My gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we're on a 3-story townhouse and on the top floor, and that he had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat couldn't run away. Also, he turned off all the lights on the lower floors, so to get out, I'd have to pass his room. I now quietly arrange my stuff in my purse while I hear his TV blaring, and to my horror, I saw him walk swiftly to his bathroom without his cane. I realize now he's not disabled, since before he said he could not walk without it. As quickly and quietly as I could, I fled and ran like hell out to the room while He's in the bathroom. I now jump like I'm an Olympic sprinter, getting out of there as quick as I can over the cat gates to the dark stairs. Now as I throw open the front door, I hear his house alarm going off. I get into my car as quick as lightning, heart beating like crazy. He then calls me immediately. I sped out of there and was terrified. Who knows what could have happened if I stayed overnight? I'm glad I didn't have to find out.
I am a mobile user, so you know the drill. This may get a bit long. This happened 4 years ago when I was in college. It was around 2 AM at a friend's parents' house, who were very laid back, and that's an understatement. Myself, my cousin, and his girlfriend at the time, Holly, were snoozing in the living room. A phone goes off and wakes up Ted, and I see it's Holly's phone. Holly's in a deep, pot-induced coma, so we ignore it and go back to sleep. The phone continues to ring, so Ted finally answers it. They've never been shy of looking into each other's phones, but don't abuse the privilege. He says hello a few times, before a male asks for Holly. Ted immediately hung up and got suspicious as to why a male was calling Holly at 2 AM. He goes through her phone while I'm in the bathroom. While washing my hand, Ted knocks on the door saying, "Hey, we need to take her home, now." So I dry my hands, and he wakes her up, and we all get in my car and drive off to her part of town. Holly keeps asking Ted what's wrong and what's going on. Ted finally blew up about the call. Emails he found in her phone proving she had been prostituting herself on Craigslist again, and that he was done. I'm as quiet as a crypt keeper, as she's bawling her eyes out and losing her shit trying to explain. We wait to get to her house before he can even fully stop the car, and he tells her to get the fuck out and to lose his number. She goes inside in a snotty mess and we leave. When we pull up to his house, we sit inside my car for a while, talking about what just happened, and giving him time to vent, and tell me that this isn't the first time they've dealt with this. Out of nowhere, a black town car pulls up right next to us, and Ted says, "Oh crap." 3 people, 2 men and an older woman get out and surround the car. I can see that the youngster of the 2 men has a firearm. The woman goes to Ted's side, yelling for him to get out of the car and take his ass whooping like a man. I start freaking out, asking who these people are, and the woman starts trying to yank my doors open and punch my windows. Ted says it's Holly's mum, her stepdad and her cousin. When his mum punched the window for the 3rd time, I noticed his cousin laying his hand near his firearm, so flight 1, and I immediately put the car in reverse and drove backwards down the street to get away. I slid into a person's yard. I've since apologised and compensated for the damage. And as we took off, I saw them run into their car and give chase. I had never been so panicked in my life. We were flying down regular road rays at 50 or 60 miles an hour. I'm running red lights, taking last minute turns. I must have burned all the treads off my tyres, because my car skidded a good handful of times. They chased us for 22 minutes, while the whole time I was praying, where the fuck is the cop when you need one? When we got to a quiet neighbourhood I knew well, we turned down a street heavily covered in trees, and Ted said, "Turn your lights off and stay on the brake." I do as I'm told and rolled down the street slowly. I stared into my rearview mirror and we saw them drive past the road that we were on, very slowly, but thankfully they didn't see us. When we were sure we lost them, I parked and started yelling at Ted, asking why they were chasing us and what was going on. As I'm having my panic attack, his phone rings and it's the mum. He answers and they say they want to meet to talk and get Holly's phone back. In the heat of everything, idiot Ted forgot to give Holly her phone back. I said I'm not meeting them without a cop present, so we tell them to meet at a local gas station that we know cops monitor frequently. When we finally get there, thankfully there was an officer on duty. They arrived 2 minutes after we did, and Ted got out to deal with them, in plain view of the cop, and the camera outside the gas station. I noticed the cousin was not in the car when they pulled up. I couldn't make out everything that was said, but Ted handed her the phone. They talked for about 15 minutes, with her flailing her hands, getting in his face and even pointed at the cop in what looked like she was going to say something to them. When it was over, he got back and we drove off. So when we dropped Holly off, she walked in her house crying. Her family immediately asked what was wrong, and Holly wouldn't say anything, just cried. So in their minds they jumped to conclusions that Ted hit her. She didn't even try and correct them. When he tried to show her mum her ways, she completely swept it under the rug, and tried to make him the reason for it all. I told him he was better off without that crazy, and he dodged a bullet. The next week was spring break, so we took a much needed trip to Colorado. Before I begin the story, I'd just like to say that I live in a big college town, so posting or responding to Craigslist ads looking for roommates is completely normal. This takes place last Thursday night. My best friend Katie was looking for a roommate as she lived with her mum and wanted to move out as soon as possible. She posted an ad on Craigslist looking for a 1-bedroom or a room for rent with roommates. A guy about our age, 22, texted her telling her that he and his girlfriend were about to have a room for rent in their town home as their other roommate was moving out. Excited and surprised at the affordability, Katie agreed to meet him and check the place out. Since she's not an idiot, she brought our good friend Damon with her. They met this guy and neighbours, and Katie decided that she really liked him and the place, but needed to get another opinion. Later that night, Katie called me and asked me if I wanted to go back over there to meet the guy. She told me how cool he was and how much we all had in common. I agreed. I texted my boyfriend, who was at work at the time, to let him know where I'd be just in case. We arrive at the apartment, and I'm instantly drawn to this guy. He had great energy and was all over sweet. His girlfriend worked over the street and came over for a few minutes on her break. She was all very sweet, and I recognised her as one of my friend's sisters. She went back to work, and we continued talking and laughing with the guy and his neighbours. The guy had made a comment about him and his girlfriend, and how they used to be into orgies and things like that. Katie and I, however, are not into such things. We left around 3 AM, and I could go pick up my boyfriend from work. The next night, Katie asked me if I wanted to go back over there and hang out, have a few drinks, and get to know his girlfriend a little better. Once again I agreed. It was just the 4 of us this time, and we were all taking a few shots, and had a couple of mixed drinks. His girlfriend has anxiety like Katie, and ended up having a horrible drunken panic attack. We left shortly after, as it was a bit much to handle, and didn't think much of it. Now, Katie's favourite movie is Harry Potter. They invited us over on Saturday night to have a Harry Potter marathon, and unfortunately, my boyfriend was at work and he couldn't attend. Everything was completely normal, up until he put the second movie in. Katie and I were sitting on the floor, and his girlfriend came down to join us for some girl talk and whatnot. Later, he came down to join us. Everything was normal for all of 10 seconds, when he decided to lie across all 3 of us. He started groping Katie, and she started groping me. Katie and I made it clear that this was not okay. Being pinned under the girlfriend, I was not able to get up as she's much bigger than me. She begins to put her hands down my pants and insert her fingers, as I'm trying to get up and telling her to stop. He gets behind his girlfriend and begins to have intercourse with her. Katie and I are trying to stand up, and he finally says, "Oh, you're not comfortable with this." We tell him that we were never comfortable with this, and we need to leave. He lays down next to us, and we gather our things, and he begins masturbating. All the while, his girlfriend is trying to pull us back down, and tackles Katie and begins groping her. We finally break free and run out the house. The next day we filed a police report for sexual assault, and we're still waiting to hear from the detective. The moral of the story is, don't look for roommates on Craigslist, and don't trust people because they seem nice.